conduct the floating man thought experiment for a moment. Just for fun, we set it up by saying that tonight when you go to bed, something spooky happens, and you wake up in a completely black void and cannot seem to see, hear, touch, smell, or taste anything. In fact, you woke up as a rock. So you're not in a real void. You're just a rock. But what do you know? Nothing. You're a rock. So, to you, or not you, it's a void. So you wake up as a rock, but magically have that same consciousness that you went to bed with. What do you think of this new world? Can you make anything of it? Things are acting on you, and you have no clue. Your void is caused by your inability to sense the world. A human could see the rock you have become, rolling down the hill in a violent, chaotic, noisy rock slide. But you, as the rock, see and feel nothing. Well, now let's imagine that your consciousness can create and grow new nerve cords that convert the rock into a more sensible creature. What sense should come first? What are senses at all? Sight is the ability to detect light hitting you. Hearing is the ability to detect air pressure hitting you. Smell and taste are the abilities to detect chemicals hitting you. Touch is the ability to detect matter hitting you. The commonly known sensations are all conscious awareness of external stuff. They come by experiencing the energy transferred to you by them. If you break this down, we have two major types of sensations, which are in one sense the same type, and in another sense completely different. 1. The ability to detect matter, and 2. The ability to detect light. As this new rock creature, we can therefore first put our magical energy into forming the ability to detect matter or light. Then, later, the other. The method for detecting matter comes in two forms. You can either get energy from its shape or energy from its force. The manner in which all the senses work is by a process called transduction, which means the translation of energy from a stimulus into the electrical signals used by the nervous system. The process is simple. When the receptor experiences a change to the membrane potential, which causes the receptor in some form or another to change shape. For smell, taste, and sight, the stimulus affects the shape of a protein, which changes the shape of the receptor in some form, and this changes the membrane potential. In order to restore the protein back to normal, the receptor needs to complete a process of balancing chemical exchanges. In touch and hearing, the receptor itself is changed by physical force, changing its shape physically, and the same type of process of restoring the cell to its ready position requires balancing chemical elements into and out of the cell. Let's start by taking in chemicals, meaning, let us start our primitive smell or taste receptor. What must happen to make this work? To sense the chemical's existence, the energy of its existence must be transferred to us somehow. Before we form the receptor, the chemicals already do exist and are already hitting us. We just need a means of catching them. So let's imagine that we create and send out nerve cells to the surface of this new rock self. And we convert those cells into old factory-like bulbs. We essentially just make a normal nerve cell. But in the walls of this cell, we stick what we call G proteins, which have a certain electrostatic potential, little grabby arms shaped in different ways. We could have it such that the goal of this living active process, the homeostasis of this cell, is to attempt to keep the G protein in a state of high energy static charge, and as such, it acts like a magnet to the molecules of the correct shape. When a molecule of the correct electrostatic shape binds to the static end pieces of the G protein, the new electrostatic charge of the G protein is decreased, and we have our cell steal that energy before the molecule can take it back. So now we need to take in new chemicals to restore the cell back to normal, and excrete this new, useless molecule somehow. If our G protein does not take the proper shape, we will not smell or taste anything in the future. The only way it works is by obeying the laws of chemistry and physics, and by that I mean by physically conforming to whatever existence is. That is, if we want to sense it, we need to conform to it first. This is the major factor that proves objectivity in conscious awareness. It's not enough to imagine what if a rock could smell a rose, only then to imagine smelling roses without the rose, the nose, or the chemical odorants that physically occupy the space. Therefore concluding something magical about consciousness not needing reality because it thinks, and thinking is all one needs to experience, right? Rather, to imagine a situation like what if a rock could smell a rose would require that you have the rock become a living creature that needs to eat food and excrete waste, so as to maintain a state of existing which requires a collective energy that is held in place by a process of homeostasis. The process cannot take a break. The depolarization of a cell becomes death if it cannot restore the balance, and it cannot restore the balance if it cannot take in and push out material, if it cannot convert it, so as to continue this process for the sake of its own existence as such. And that just having a material cell, which is called a nerve, is not enough. It is not enough merely to have it living. To sense reality, including itself, it needs to shape itself to reality. The magical evolving rock we created needs to make a G protein, which has its static rods in the same form or shape as the odorant that comes from the rose. If the G protein is in the wrong shape, the detection cannot occur. If we give this rock that is now us the ability to touch, we give it some cells which, when stretched or strained in some physical way, likewise causes the cell to change form, and the mechanical energy received from the physical force pushing on the receptor is converted into electrical energy. This new nerve cell type can thus be used to have a primitive form of touch or hearing. So with these two receptors, we can have a rudimentary sense of smell, taste, touch, and hearing. So let us add sight. We take some of the G proteins used to detect smells, and we make a G protein called opsin, which uses its electrostatic potential grabby arms to hold on to a molecule called retinol in its center. When light hits that molecule, it changes shape, and the G protein holding onto it also changes shape, and the new shape has less energy than the normal shape, and so the energy is released, and again our cell steals that energy before the molecule can take it back. Therefore, we need to restore the retinol molecule back to normal, using metabolism to keep us in homeostasis. The molecule of retinol only changes because it receives energy of a certain size, which is enough energy to affect the molecule, or the atoms that make up that molecule, or the subatomic properties of the atoms in that molecule. So again, the senses of touch, hearing, and sight demonstrate objectivity. Quoting Ayn Rand, objectivity begins with the realization that man, including his every attribute and faculty, including his consciousness, is an entity of a specific nature who must act accordingly. That there is no escape from the law of identity, neither in the universe which he deals, nor in the workings of his own consciousness. And if he is to acquire knowledge of the first, he must discover the proper methods of using the second. That there's no room for the arbitrary in any activity of man, least of all in his method of cognition, and just as he has learned to be guided by objective criteria in making his physical tools, so he must be guided by objective criteria in forming his tools of cognition, his concepts. This is what was happening with our magical rock. In order to get us out of that magical, imaginary void we found ourselves, our only means of getting out is by physically shaping ourselves such that things in reality can interact with us. The notion that consciousness comes first vanishes when you realize that all conscious awareness comes not just by somehow sensing sensoriness, but comes first by having parts that can interact with reality. That the thing that makes the first living creature a living creature is that it exists in reality made from material parts, and that when external energy changes the potentials and shapes of that creature, that it has to apply an active process to restore itself back to its original shape. The act of sensing follows when that life form uses that energy which unbalanced it in order to do something for its life. Thus, the difference between the rock interacting with objects and a living creature sensing objects is that the energy is used for something for its life. The more types of receptors we add, the more spectrums of energy we take in. For example, in sight, you have rods, red cones, blue cones, and green cones. So your sense of sight has at least 4 different receptors, so as to cover a range of the available spectrums of energy which were already present before the creature evolved to see them. In fact, the only reason we do evolve these senses is because there is something to sense. The moment the life form has any centralizing region where all the detectors meet is the moment that a detection on one cell is the detection of here as opposed to everywhere else. Recall that we awoke one morning as a rock, but magically we had our consciousness. But before we magically formed our nerve cells, we said we could be in a violent, chaotic, noisy landslide, and not even know it. Let's imagine that we are. We are this magical, living rock thing, so long as we retain this rock shape. But we have no senses. Therefore, we cannot tell at all that we are in a rock slide. So we break apart, and game over. But imagine that when we put the sense receptors on our surface, and little cilia fibers to go with them, and when our senses are acted upon, we get the cilia fibers to move us perpendicular to the sense direction of the stimulus. And, therefore, we shimmy out of the rock slide more or less unharmed. This would allow us to pass on our rock genes compared to those other rocks that had no sense that reality existed. The formation of sense receptors that help us get better and better at staying alive are doing so by getting better and better at sensing the objects of reality. What we are left with, then, is this entity, in reality, whose every attribute and faculty is of a specific nature which helps it to exist in nature as the kind of entity it is. And that its specific nature is to identify the identities of the objects that exist around it, as that is what has as gradually, gradiently, and naturally as a river flowing downhill been the very factor that allows for species to continue existing. When we wake up from our bad dream of having dreamt we were a rock reinventing itself into a small creature, we realize something. All of our experiences are real and do come from reality in a certain form which is independent of our knowledge of it. And any knowledge we acquire of it first came from our ability to detect its energy, nay, to take its energy for our own. First, we must have an attribute or faculty which can physically receive the energy that exists, and then to do something with it, which at our level of cognition includes the perception of it and the conceptions of it. We have so many receptors arranged in such and such a manner that we can make some of the cells move to automatic faculties of keeping us alive, and can use the rest of the space, which there is plenty of, to move to a specific region which perceives the objects, not just senses them. From there, we also had room to add spaces where the perceptions come together, and we compare percepts to form concepts. Concepts can be wrong because we have complete control of their formation and editing. Perception is an integration of your sensations and cannot be wrong. What you perceive is what you perceive. And again, you evolved to perceive it because it was perceivable, and that either led to reproductive survival or was merely happening to some creature that was capable of surviving for other reasons. If you think an optical illusion shows your perception to be wrong, recall that it was not true or false that you saw what you saw or heard what you heard. It was your conceptual claim that what you saw or heard was something more than it was. Only that can be said to be true or false. An illusion is a trick on the conceptual mind, not on the body. The body always detects reality as it must, by causal, physical principles. This video is possible thanks to contributions to the Existence University Patreon by viewers like you. Thank you.